It was a typical morning in Mrs. Thompson's seventh-grade history class. The students were scattered across their desks, talking amongst themselves as they waited for the bell to ring and officially start the day. Mrs. Thompson, a middle-aged woman known for her strict demeanor, had asked the class to share something personal as an icebreaker. When it came time for Elijah Johnson to speak, he stood up with quiet confidence, his hands resting on the edge of his desk. "My dad works at the Pentagon," Elijah said, looking around the room. His voice was steady, his words clear. He wasn't seeking attention, just stating a simple fact. A brief silence filled the room before a few giggles broke out. It wasn't unusual for kids to make big claims, but something about Elijah's statement made it hard to believe. Mrs. Thompson, however, wasn't laughing. She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms and leaning against her desk, sizing up the young boy. "Really?" she asked, her tone laced with skepticism. "The Pentagon, huh? That's a big claim for a kid your age. Are you sure about that?" Elijah didn't flinch, his eyes never leaving hers. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My dad works there. He's very important, and he's always very busy." The class buzzed with whispers. Some students rolled their eyes, others giggled, but Elijah remained calm, not understanding the source of their doubt. He had always known his dad's job was important. His father had told him about the complex work he did, but Elijah never fully understood the specifics. What he did know was that his dad worked at one of the most significant buildings in the country, and that was enough for him. But Mrs. Thompson's expression hardened. She stood a little straighter and made her voice more authoritative. "Well, Elijah, I think you should double-check your facts before making claims like that. The Pentagon isn't exactly the kind of place kids are familiar with, is it?" she said, a touch of mockery creeping into her voice. The class seemed to snicker at her words, but Elijah's face didn't betray his thoughts. He sat down, not offering any more information. He knew the truth, and that was enough. But the embarrassment began to settle in his chest as the class continued, the whispers growing louder. As the days passed, Elijah tried to shake off the incident with Mrs. Thompson. The rest of the week was filled with the usual middle school activities, homework, tests, and friendships. But the ridicule that followed that one comment haunted him more than he cared to admit. His classmates had begun making snide remarks about his father, mimicking his words about the Pentagon and making exaggerated jokes about how Elijah must have been making things up. At lunch one day, Elijah sat at a table by himself, picking at his food. His best friend, Carlos, walked over, plopping down beside him with a grin. "Hey, man, you're still sticking to that 'my dad works at the Pentagon' story," Carlos said, his tone light but filled with a hint of teasing. Elijah didn't look up. "Yeah, why?" Carlos laughed. "Come on, Elijah, you don't really expect anyone to believe that, do you? Mrs. Thompson was right to call you out on that. You're just a kid." Elijah clenched his jaw, trying to hold back the frustration bubbling up inside. He didn't know why it bothered him so much. After all, it wasn't like he had lied. But the constant mockery and doubt had begun to gnaw at him. He wished he could explain it to everyone, that his dad wasn't just anyone but an important person working in an important place. Yet there was no real way to do that without looking like he was making excuses. He could feel his confidence slipping away bit by bit. The next day, when Elijah walked into Mrs. Thompson's classroom, he felt the eyes of his classmates on him. They were still whispering, still laughing under their breath. His claim about his dad seemed to have become some kind of joke in the class, but he held his head high. He wasn't going to let their doubts get to him, even though a small part of him felt like he had failed in front of them. He didn't have to prove anything to them. He knew the truth, and that was enough. Mrs. Thompson called the class to order, and the lesson began. Yet, as Elijah sat there listening to her speak, he couldn't shake the feeling that her words had been laced with more than just skepticism. There was a hidden judgment in the way she questioned him, a subtle message that told him in no uncertain terms that people like him didn't belong in places like the Pentagon. As class ended and the students filed out, Elijah stood by the door for a moment, staring at the floor. He wondered if he would ever get the chance to prove them all wrong, to show them that his father's job was real and that his family mattered just as much as anyone else's. But for now, he could only walk away with his head held high, knowing that despite the ridicule, his father's work was something he could always be proud of. The following week was just as challenging for Elijah. The laughter from his classmates, especially after the incident with Mrs. Thompson, continued to haunt him. Every time someone made a joke or mimicked his words about his father, it chipped away at the pride he had once felt about his family. Elijah didn't know why he cared so much. It wasn't like the other kids understood, but the weight of their doubt pressed on him, and it became harder to shake off. One Friday afternoon, as the school bell rang to signal the end of the school day, Elijah gathered his things in a daze. He was eager to get home, to be away from the mocking, away from the whispers, and away from the feeling that he was somehow inadequate. His mind wandered as he stuffed his books into his bag, and the hallway outside the classroom grew louder as students laughed and chattered, eager for the weekend. Just as Elijah slung his backpack over his shoulder, he felt a tap on his arm. It was Carlos again, but this time the tone in his voice was different. It wasn't teasing or playful. "Hey man, you need to come with me." "Now," Carlos said, his face serious. Elijah blinked in confusion. "What's going on?" "Just follow me," Carlos urged, glancing over his shoulder as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "You're gonna want to see this." Carlos led him out of the classroom and down the hallway toward the school's front doors. Elijah was still confused, but followed nonetheless. When they reached the entrance, the sight that greeted him was beyond anything he could have expected. A sleek black SUV was parked right outside the school, the engine idling smoothly. Several teachers were gathered by the door, murmuring in surprise, some even pointing. But it wasn't the car itself that caught Elijah's attention. It was the man stepping out of the vehicle. Elijah's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the tall figure in a suit. It was his father, his dad, the man he had talked about in class, the one Mrs. Thompson and the others had doubted. Elijah stood frozen in place, unable to move. His father didn't just walk into the school. He strode through the doors with an air of authority, as though he owned the place. His suit was immaculate, his posture impeccable. Elijah had never seen him look so commanding. Carlos, too, was staring, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Dude, that's your dad?" he whispered, his voice filled with awe. Before Elijah could respond, his father spotted him across the lobby. His face lit up with a smile that made Elijah's chest swell with pride. The moment his dad saw him, he started walking toward him, ignoring the curious gazes of the teachers. The voices of the teachers had quieted, and Elijah could feel the weight of their gazes on him. The same teachers who had been skeptical of his father's job, the ones who had dismissed him as a liar, now stood, mouths agape, watching as Elijah's father approached. "Hey, champ," his dad said, his voice warm and familiar. Elijah's heart skipped. He could feel the embarrassment and confusion slip away, replaced by something that felt like relief and pride. His dad was here, and this wasn't just any visit. This was proof. Proof that his father was who he had always said he was. "I'll be right back," his dad said, his voice still calm as he turned to face the teachers who were now standing near the doors. They shifted uncomfortably under his gaze, and Elijah could see the panic in their eyes. They had underestimated him, misjudged him and his family, but now it was too late. As his father walked past the teachers, he offered a polite nod before turning back to Elijah, who was still standing near the entrance. Elijah couldn't help but smile. His dad had always been a man of few words, but his presence alone spoke volumes. "What's going on, Dad?" Elijah asked, still trying to process the situation. His father smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I had a meeting nearby, and I thought I'd drop by. It seems you've been making quite the impression around here." Elijah blinked. "You mean you're not here to pick me up?" His dad laughed softly. "I'm here to make sure the school knows who you are and who I am. Let's just say I've been getting some interesting phone calls today." Elijah felt a rush of understanding. His father wasn't just here to visit. He was here to set things right, to remind those who had doubted him that they had been wrong. His dad wasn't just some figurehead at the Pentagon. He was an influential man with power and authority, and he had come here to back up his son. As they stood in the school lobby, Elijah could see the teachers exchanging uncomfortable glances. Some were avoiding eye contact, others seemed to shrink under his father's gaze. It was clear that the moment they had doubted Elijah had been the moment. They had underestimated the wrong person. Marcus Johnson's presence was a silent declaration. He didn't have to say anything. His authority, his career, his reputation spoke for itself. And in that instant, Elijah knew everything would change. The tension in the school lobby lingered as Marcus stood beside Elijah, silently acknowledging the awkward stares from the teachers and principal. His presence was a clear statement, but it wasn't just about standing up to the system. It was a reminder of the power of truth. Marcus wasn't there to embarrass anyone. He was there to show that his family's worth wasn't determined by the assumptions others made about them. "Dad, why did you come here?" Elijah whispered, his voice filled with uncertainty. Marcus smiled at his son, his hand still resting on Elijah's shoulder. "Because no one gets to question you, Elijah, not in front of anyone, and certainly not in front of a class that should be learning the truth." Elijah didn't respond, but he felt a deep sense of pride well up in him. His dad had just made it clear to everyone in that room that his family was not to be underestimated. Not for their race, not for their background, and certainly not for where they came from. "Marcus," Principal Harris called out, his voice trembling slightly as he approached the two of them, "I understand the situation, but I think we should discuss this in private. There are better ways to handle these things." Marcus didn't flinch. He remained calm, but there was an underlying edge in his voice that showed he wasn't backing down. "You think I don't know how to handle things, Principal? I'm here because I know what needs to be done." And the way Elijah was treated today, like his truth didn't matter, cannot be brushed aside. It's not just about you and me having a conversation. This is bigger than that. The principal shifted uncomfortably. He had expected the conversation to go differently, to have some level of control. But this wasn't a situation where his position gave him the upper hand. Marcus had already claimed his power by showing up, and the truth was on his side. "We can work on this," Principal Harris said, trying to regain control. "I can assure you we take matters of discrimination seriously, but maybe we need to look at how we address situations like this in the future." Marcus gave a cold nod, a look that said everything. "You need to do more than just look. I want to see action." The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Elijah had been the subject of ridicule, but now, with his father standing up for him, things were beginning to shift. The investigation into the incident within the school grew, with Marcus pushing for the school to take serious steps in addressing the treatment of his son and other students of color. But more than that, it was about making sure Elijah knew that his voice mattered. At the next school board meeting, Principal Harris made an unexpected announcement. He, along with the teachers involved in Elijah's incident, were going to attend training on racial sensitivity and implicit bias. They would work with community leaders to create a more inclusive school environment, with a special focus on ensuring that students' backgrounds and truths were never questioned in the way Elijah's had been. When Elijah heard about the changes, he felt a sense of pride wash over him. His dad's actions had made a real difference, not just for him, but for every student who would walk through those doors in the future. The real lesson was not just about standing up for himself, but about understanding the power of truth and the importance of using it to bring about change. Elijah walked out of the school building with Marcus beside him, a renewed sense of confidence in his step. His father had made sure the world knew the truth about who they were, and now it seemed that the world was listening. "Do you feel better now?" Marcus asked, looking down at his son with a proud smile. Elijah nodded, his face glowing. "Yeah, I do. I don't have to hide my dad's job or my truth anymore." Marcus placed his hand on Elijah's shoulder once more, the weight of the moment sinking in. The battle wasn't over. There would always be people who tried to question them, but Marcus knew that as long as they stayed true to themselves, they could handle anything that came their way. Together they walked out of the school, ready for the future.